welcome to this important and timely conversation about the needs of Black-owned businesses during the first week of Black History Month. I'm Tammy Halevi, and along with my colleague, Renee Johnson, who will be moderating today's conversation, we lead Reimagine Main Street, an initiative of public-private strategies. Reimagine Main Street is a cross-sector, multi-stakeholder initiative intended to ensure that small businesses and their workers in every community are at the center of an equitable COVID recovery. In addition to organizing events like this one, we generate data-driven insights. In the coming days, we'll be releasing findings from a national poll to better understand policy priorities and preferences of more than 2,400 small business owners, including around 600 Black-owned businesses. Today's program will begin with remarks from Senator Cardin, including some question and answers, followed by a panel among a phenomenal group of business owners and ecosystem leaders. And finally, we'll close with remarks from Marc, President and CEO of the National Urban League. We are excited. Before we jump in, I'd like to take a moment to offer gratitude to all of the speakers, Senator Cardin and the staff of the Small Business Committee, Melissa Bradley of 1863 Ventures, Ron Busby Sr. and his staff from the U.S. Black Chambers, Rashad Robinson and his staff at Color of Change, Isiah Thomas and the staff of Isiah International, and Marc Morial and Stephanie Devane of the National Urban League. We'd also like to acknowledge our presenting partners for this event, Small Business for America's Future, especially Stephen Jordan, T. Rowe of America's SBDCs, Carl Brown and his staff at the Washington, D.C. SBDC, Lydia Pope, who's president-elect, and Antoine Thompson, executive director of the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, Jamon Phoenix and John Stanford of the Page 30 Coalition, and Corinne Hodges of the Association of Women's Business Centers, a terrific group of organizations doing the heavy lifting in community. Quick housekeeping, we'll do our best to take questions. Please chat them in the chat box. Finally, this event is being recorded and live streamed. It is now my great pleasure to introduce and welcome Shondell Newsome. He's the co-chair of Small Business for America's Future, the founder of Some New Communications, and chairman of the board of the Urban Chamber of Commerce of Las Vegas. Shondell, over to you.
Thank you, Tammy. Good afternoon, all. My name is Shondell Newsome, and I'm co-chair of Small Business for America's Future, a small business organization focused on making sure small business voices are represented at every level of government. I'm also a small business owner in Las Vegas, in Las Vegas, Nevada. In 2006, after serving in the Air Force for a decade and working as marketing director in hospitality for several years, I opened a marketing firm in Las Vegas with one central mission: to elevate and champion small businesses, especially minority and women-powered businesses in Nevada. My daughter and I now run this business together. She became the majority owner several years ago. As we celebrate Black History Month, I reflect on the business my daughter and I have built and how organizations like Small Business for America's Future focus on public policy and advocates for those who supported Booker T. Washington in his endeavors for economic prosperity with the Negro Business League. In the early 1900s are the reason why Black-owned companies like mine exist and prosper today. Sadly, during this pandemic, this could all come crashing down. With over 300,000 businesses shuttered across the country, too many of us are asking if we're next. I worry especially about fellow Black business owners who are bearing a disproportionate burden during this crisis. According to a survey conducted by Reimagine Main Street, a project of the public-private strategies alongside the U.S. Black Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and the National Asian American Chamber of Commerce, released findings from the largest survey of diverse and small businesses found that 33% of Black-owned businesses report having less than a month of cash to cover expenses in December. There are millions of Booker T. Washingtons, Nearest Greens, and C.J. Walkers out there. Imagine how strong we would be if all had an economy that, rather than throwing up barriers to their entrepreneurship, sought to unleash our economic potential. Our entire country would benefit. Black businesses are hurting in an economic crisis, not of their own making. And we know that if you invest in small businesses, it will pay dividends for the nearly 70 million Americans that they employ. While some small businesses have been helped by previous rounds of funding, it was done inequitable, and there is more to do. Small business owners create 2 out of every 3 jobs in this country. In order for us all to thrive, we need strong investment in small business, yes, Black businesses, the people for us and the communities we operate in. Every dollar you invest in small business is an investment in jobs, workers, and the community. Finally, it is my pleasure to introduce Senator Ben Cardin, incoming chair to the Senate Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee. Welcome, Senator, and thank you for joining us.
Shondell, thank you very much. It really is my pleasure to be with you all. And Tammy, thank you for arranging this. This is a very appropriate discussion for Black History Month to start the month. And I very much appreciate the panel that you put together. We have challenges, but let me start off with a little bit of good news. At approximately 5:45 this morning, United States Senate passed President Biden's first budget resolution, and Vice President Harris broke the tie so that we were able to pass it by a 51-50 vote in the United States Senate. This is the budget outline that will allow a $1.9 trillion relief package to now be considered on the floor of the United States Senate. And we can consider this by a simple majority. We don't have to produce the 60 vote threshold. So we're not at the finish line yet. We haven't completed the work, but we are certainly on our path to carry out President Biden's commitment to get COVID-19 under control and get our economy back on track and to build back better. And I want to talk about that because the challenge is not only to build back, but to build back better. We've suffered over the last 4 years from policies that have really excluded so many Americans from the opportunities of this country. We now have a president and a vice president who are committed to making sure there's opportunity for all. And I'm telling you, I could not be more pleased as I was going through the confirmation process with the SBA administrator, with the Secretary of the Treasury, with other key cabinet positions for President Biden. Their commitment to inclusion, their commitment to deal with the gaps that we have in our community. We know that we have systemic racism in America. We know that it's in policing, and we can talk about that, but it's also in our economy and economic opportunities. And this is an area where we can make progress during this Congress. I am the chair now of the Senate Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee. Thank you, Georgia, for those 2 Senate seats. Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff, 2 incredibly talented new members of the Senate, but they give us the majority in the Senate and therefore give us the gavels. Our priority is to make sure that the tools that are available for small businesses are used for inclusion and that we target our help to minority small businesses, to the underserved community, the underbanked community. So let me just give you some of the numbers. You know these, but if you look at the principal tools available at the SBA and you look at how well minority small businesses are benefiting from it, we all need to be concerned. Black businesses account for about 4.5% of all 7A loans. That's inexcusable. Hispanic community is 8.5% of the loans. Women, 18%. Veterans, 4%. These are numbers that we must respond to. We must do much better. So when we had an opportunity to significantly increase the tools that were available to respond to COVID-19, Congress passed in the CARES Act the Paycheck Protection Program and the EIDL Loan Program and the EIDL Advance Program. We wanted to make sure that the underserved communities had first opportunities here because we recognized there was going to be challenges. And I know that one of your participating partners is the Page 30 Coalition. And that's one of my favorite groups, because when we take a look at what we were able to do, we recognized that by putting this program under commercial banks, it would be challenging for the underbanked community, for minority community, for small businesses. So we put in the legislation a direction to the Small Business Administration to prioritize loans to the underserved community. Now, when we audited to see how well they did, the IG for the SBA acknowledged that the SBA did not comply with the intent of Congress. So as we revisited the programs, we had to do more. And we did do more. If you look at what was done in the recently passed omnibus bill, we recognized that we had to build up mission lenders who are committed to lending in the underserved communities, in the minority communities, in the underbanked communities. So we provided $10 billion of help for the CDFIs and MDIs, because we recognize that we have to build up capacity in the community. And but that wasn't enough. We also needed to have carve-outs for the mission lenders, so they're guaranteed a certain amount of their resources. We also recognize that we had to beef up some of our other programs. The PPP program, through January, there was 5.2 million loans given out for $525 billion. This is a huge program. We got to make sure it gets to the right people. So let me go over our priorities. We recognize that the EIDL program, this is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, are direct loans from the SBA. So you don't have to go to commercial lenders. And we find that minority businesses do much better on the EIDL loans. They're larger. This is working capital. But we also provided for an EIDL advance, because we know a lot of small businesses can't afford to take out any more loans. They need grants to get through the COVID-19, and they need grants for help. So we developed the advance program. But here's what happened. As we audited how it was working under the Trump administration, we found that although the EIDL loan program was supposed to be loans up to $2 million, they were only made up to $150,000. And although the EIDL advance program should have been $10,000, they cut it back to $1,000 per employee. The average size of a company that was taking out EIDL advances was between 4 and 5 workers. So the average grant ended up being around $4,500. Now, if you look at the demographics of the companies that are using the EIDL program, either the loan or the advance, there are much larger numbers of minority small businesses, much larger numbers in underserved communities. So we have to make these programs work effectively. So here we are now looking at what we're going to do in the next round, the round that we started working on early this morning. And in that round, we wanted to make sure that those businesses that were entitled to $10,000 get that $10,000 advance. There'll be a much larger number of Black small businesses in that demographic numbers. We also want to make sure that we target the relief to those small businesses that really need it in the underserved communities. And we have ways of doing that, and we're going to look at that. My priorities going into this new Congress, I've already introduced 3 bills, and I just want to share that information briefly, and then we'll open it up for your questions. When you take a look at the numbers again, about the dollars that are available in the emerging markets, the venture capital for Black small businesses, the number is almost zero. It's extremely difficult to get capital for starting in an emerging market or a new business. So I've introduced 2 bills to make a difference here. One, the Office of Emerging Markets within the SBA that would help Black small business, minority small businesses get the capital for the emerging markets, a special program aimed directly at them. The other is the Uplift program that would partner with HBCUs, and minority institutions to develop accelerator programs, incubator programs, mentoring programs for minority small businesses in startup situations so that they can have a way to get off the ground, which has been more and more difficult for minority small businesses. In addition, I've introduced a New Start program to not only take away any disqualifications for returning citizens being able to participate in the SBA program, but to provide a special mentoring program and help for returning citizens in order to be able to access the small business tools. All these we think would help. We want to strengthen the minority business development agencies, MBDAs. We'd like to make them permanent and statutory. Today, they're just by executive order, and broaden their abilities. We want to improve the resource partners. I'm very proud that in Maryland last year, we went from 1 women's business center to 3. We need to continue to invest in the resource partners. President Biden wants to use community navigators so that we can reach into communities where they may not have the same assets and information on how to get these tools so they can get the help that they need. So there's a lot of things that we want to do to really help the Black small businesses, other minority small businesses, the smaller the small businesses, those in underserved communities, those that are underbanked, so that they can get the help they need, which today they're not getting. This is just one part of Build Back Better. We could talk about a lot of other things. We could talk about the broadband gap in America. We could talk about justice and policing. There's a lot of issues I know the Biden administration is going to concentrate on, and we're going to concentrate in Congress. But in small business, there's a real opportunity in this Congress to make a real difference, to increase opportunity and to narrow the gap in our country. And we're going to work hard to advance these issues. So with that, let me turn it back to you. I'll be glad to take a couple of questions. I know you have an outstanding panel that's following me. I want to make sure we stay on schedule.
Thanks, Senator Cardin. We have a couple of questions that have come in, but we're going to generalize some of it. And I know we are a little behind schedule, so and I know you have a lot of things to do on the Senate floor. And thank you so much for all you did, especially to the wee hours of this morning. So we'll just ask you 2 kind of grouped questions of things we're seeing in the chat. The MBDA, Minority Development Agency under the Department of Commerce, has been what many believe as an untapped resource for minority communities, specifically Black small businesses across the country. How can the MBDA be expanded and provide resources for the hardest hit by the pandemic, Black small business owners?
Thanks for that question. I'm introducing legislation, the Minority Business Resiliency Act, that will codify the Minority Business Development Agency, will expand its capacity in areas where it can be effective, providing greater resources. We think that we can really expand the opportunities under the MBDAs. But most importantly, we want to have a statutory base for it. There is no statutory base today, and we want to put more resources into it. You're correct. It doesn't come under the SBA, it comes under Commerce, but we think working with our partners, we can get the MBDAs more on a sounder footing, and then use that as a platform to expand its reach into more minority businesses.
Thank you, Senator. And a last question that we'll kind of group together. And I think some people saw this yesterday during the hearing for Administrator Guzman to be approved as a new administrator. Last year, the SBA modified the eligibility requirements for small business owners who applied to the PPP, where those who have criminal records or criminal convictions that had nothing to do with economic crimes or have not been sentenced or found guilty of a crime were denied access to those loans. How can the Small Business Committee ensure rules like this are no longer created or implemented?
Well, first, during her nomination hearing, Isabel Guzman was very, very sympathetic to taking executive action to eliminate the executive action taken by the Trump administration that imposed limitations on those who could participate in the PPP program if they had a criminal record. Originally, it was a 5-year on any felony charge, either convicted or indicted. That was outrageous. We were able to get that to be reduced to 1 year. That's not acceptable. I've been working with Senator Portman, so we have a Democrat and Republican to eliminate these restrictions. Senator Booker is taking a lead on these issues as well. There is no reason why individual, except if they have been convicted of an economic crime that would be directly related to the type of loans that we're talking about or grants that we're talking about, there should be no disqualifications. Let me just tell you a sad vote yesterday. There was a vote offered by Senator Kennedy to disqualify individuals from any SBA tools who have been convicted. It could be a misdemeanor anytime in their life dealing with civil disorder, which is ridiculous. So we have work to do in order to remove these disqualifications. It is just outrageous against the values of America and certainly discriminatory against the Black community when we know we have discrimination in the criminal justice system itself on the number of individuals who have been convicted of crime, to have disqualifications on participating in SBA programs because of prior convictions where the individuals already paid the price and have now returned to the community, wants to work in the community, they should be able to fully participate in the tools of the SBA.
And thank you so much for your leadership on these issues and the work to help support Black small businesses during this time. We thank you so much, Senator Cardin, and we know your staff is here on the call as well, so they definitely will be in the chat too. So if you guys have any questions you'd like to ask Senator Cardin, please feel free to drop it in the chat. And Senator Cardin, thank you so much for your time.
I'm glad you said that because I was looking at the chat and I see there's some questions that have been asked. Our staff will take a look at that and we'll try to get back to you on those points. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am truly excited to introduce members of this panel. And today's event is part of Reimagine Main Street initiative, which was launched to ensure that helping small business owners of color and their workers are the center of COVID-19 recovery efforts. We are thrilled to be joined by so many of those partners that we've listed before. So I'd like to give a quick introduction. First, we have Isiah Thomas, NBA Hall of Famer and Chairman CEO of Isiah International. Melissa Bradley, Managing Partner of 1863 Ventures. Ron Busby, President CEO of US Black Chambers, Inc., or most people know the acronym USBC. And Rashad Robinson, President of Color Change. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. So we'll start off with a quick question to Mr. Robinson. Has Congress done enough to provide resources that could really help Black small business owners during this pandemic?
Well, the short answer is no, they haven't done enough yet. And if you just ask Black small business owners, in particular, the polling that we have done showed that over 75% of Black business owners did not feel that the loans and the relief were set up for them. And I think though that we have to sort of back up though and have a larger sort of conversation, because by just simply answering no, one might come to the conclusion that, well, if we just added more money in, that somehow that it would then benefit Black small business owners. But this is not simply a question of sort of unfortunate or an accident. This is a question of design. And over again in the design of these programs, they are not sort of accidentally not delivering for Black people, but they are delivering in ways that they are absolutely sort of working the way they've been set up. Black people are not less likely to get loans from the bank. Banks are less likely to give loans to Black people. If we just focus on fixing Black communities, Black business owners, simply only focusing on things like programs to train business owners and don't deal with system design, we don't deal with the structural failures. We put more money into a bucket that actually has a hole in it and has all sorts of ways in which it will leak. And so over and over again, we're gonna have to look at system design. If we truly want to deal with the problems that we're seeing, it's not gonna simply be about putting more money into failed programs and systems, but redesigning systems that actually deliver, and then ensuring that there is enforcement of those systems, that there's transparency, that there's amplification, and that there's a level of evaluation. So when they don't work in real time, we can figure out all the ways. Over and over again, this has been a problem when it comes to dealing with issues of banking, when it comes to issues of delivering for Black and brown small business owners. The system is not broken. It is operating exactly the way it's designed. And that means it's a design problem that we all have to work to fix. And that is the opportunity ahead for Congress, to not simply put money into bad systems, but to fix those systems so that we can all benefit.
Wow, I love that. And you quoted a lot of things that we need to reinforce. It's not that Black people can't get loan from banks, it's just banks won't loan to Black people. That is a very powerful statement. I'd like to go to you now, Mr. Thomas. Everybody knows you are the legendary and my favorite basketball player. And people don't usually see the transition from athlete to a amazing small business owner. How did you make that successful transition?
Well, Rashad just touched on it, and he did a great job explaining it. Just truly understanding the system that we live in, that we are governed under, and that we operate in. And, Renee, you and I grew up in Chicago. I'm from the west side of Chicago. And, we were always talked about how to operate and live within the system that we're actually governed and ruled under. When I got into the NBA, being the first generation of wealth in my family, my goal was to uplift my family out of poverty, not just myself, but how was I going to uplift my family out of poverty? And I started my firm, Isiah International, which really does a lot of business outside of the United States, but we also do business inside of the United States. My goal was to send all my nieces and nephews and my kids to college, have them learn skills, and as they graduated from college, the debt that they would repay back, their student loans, so to speak, was to come and work at Isiah International, and we would find a skill and a place for them to work. I currently operate in 4 spaces right now, in the real estate space, the champagne space, the hemp space and cannabis space, and also in the construction space. So all these different avenues have given our family and my family a way to uplift, employ, but also to prepare for the next generation to be able to sustain it, not only through education, but also providing them with opportunity.
Wow, and that's so true. Coming from places like Chicago, it's not easy to make it out and be successful. And for you to have not only a great career as an NBA player, but also to be an icon in the small business world is amazing as well. So thank you so much for doing that and helping your nieces and nephews not having college loan debt. Next question is for Melissa. Access to capital and equity are 2 essential components of creating and sustaining businesses. Many small business owners pre-COVID experienced barriers to obtaining capital. What are some ways Congress should assist, as well as the venture capitalists in the world, in helping Black small business owners?
Well, thank you for having me. And I just want to say amen to Brother Rashad, who I'm proud to call a friend. I think we have to look at this, that there are lots of things can be done, and I will answer the question and provide some tactics. But I think we also have to understand that the system was not designed for us, and we have to go a little bit farther. So I want to acknowledge and commend Senator Cardin for what he spoke about, but recognizing, as I'm seeing in the chat, a lot of these programs are still not meeting us where we are because of the access barriers. If you think about the PPP program, there was no thought about the institutions that we use, which were community development financial institutions or online lenders. They were, I won't say purposely, but no one thought about how do I actually get to Black and brown businesses. And so the first thing I would say, and the biggest thing that I think us as Black entrepreneurs and investors need to own is that we have to get better at telling our story. It can no longer just be an individualistic story. This is my business, this is this business, that business. But I know Tammy will be familiar with the statistic, but right now we know America is foregoing an estimated 1.1 million businesses owned by people of color because of past and present discrimination or just straight up systemic racism. Without these businesses, we are losing 9 million more jobs and over $300 billion in national income. So we have to start framing this. So this is not just about having Black and brown businesses, but Black women is the fastest growing segment. Latinx business, the fastest growing. Your underinvestment in us is actually crippling the economic security of this country. Is that what y'all really want? And so that we've got to frame and lead with data. I think Senator Cardin talked about a lot of things around supporting the MBDA. I used to be on the FACA for Commerce. There's amazing work they could be doing, but it can't just be allocating money. There has to be system change. And one that is running through the chat that I am screaming loud and clear is alternative credit scores. We are currently, when we do have access to debt, paying 1 to 1.5 percentage points more, and that's actually legal. And so we've got to do a better way of allowing us to level up and better understand the contextual circumstances upon which we are running our businesses and not undervalue those because they do not look like our white peers. So thinking about credit score, having the MBDA, but recognizing barriers need to be removed. Supplier diversity is huge on the Biden-Harris campaign trail, but the reality is, having worked in government twice, there are no systems, there is friction that does not allow a sole proprietor to level up because they don't have access in terms of being able to fill out those proposals. So I think where Congress needs to sit is say, look, amazing proposals, but can we actually work through implementation and reduce the friction for Black businesses, particularly recognizing most of us are sole proprietors to be able to access this opportunity to continue to create jobs. You asked me a venture capitalist. Well, I got a whole sermon on venture capitalists, but I'm going to drop something in the chat for everyone. At 1863, we actually did a panel, a town hall that we did specifically for investors who wanted to invest in entrepreneurs of color. So there's a whole guidebook we created for them, and I say pull it down and share it. But there's 3 big things. One, you have to recognize that you giving us money is not solving the greater problem of systemic racism, and you need to create and move your venture firm to be anti-racist, which is not the same as I actually care about Black people. They are not the same. The second thing is you have to really understand and do the research on what happens when I come as an entrepreneur. Research I did at Georgetown says it costs $250,000 more for a Black entrepreneur to set up the same exact business as their white peer. And that is both direct and indirect costs. So don't do pattern recognition and don't do apples to apples when I show up on your desk saying, how come you didn't get farther? And now as a venture-backed entrepreneur, I can have those conversations, but we've got to level set that their current process needs to change. Otherwise, we're never going to meet their expectation. The final thing I would say is that we need to understand that what happened in the numbers that we're seeing in all these statistics, I want to say, let's pause and not get paranoid that we're losing all Black businesses. Because of the lack of access to capital, I would say our entrepreneurs have revolving stops and starts because we got to go drive an Uber or we got to do something else. So we should not let the 40% scare people and say, oh my God, they're going away. We need to better understand that the system is broken, Brother Rashad, that there are clearly entrepreneurs like Brother Isiah that are doing it, that we cannot just throw money, but we need to look at the underlying systems of deployment and application and decision-making and say, how do we make those processes anti-racist? And to venture capitalists, they need to really understand that as the fastest growing segment, you need to unlock the capital, not just call us a set aside, and begin to understand how our valuation looks very different from our white peers. But I guarantee you, if you invest in us, we're not just going to make money back, but we're actually going to create jobs to this country that's actually going to help them and the larger economic prosperity for all of us.
I feel like a whole bunch of snaps right there for that. And you did preach. So thank you for that, because we need to hear these words. Mr. Busby, I'm going to come to you real quick. And we know that you got an announcement later on too. So we're excited for you to make that announcement. But in our December 10th small business owner survey that we did jointly with your organization, we found that small businesses that have been hit hard by the economic, health, and social crisis triggered by COVID-19, with Black businesses suffering disproportionately. What are some ways your membership would like to see relief and assistance in these areas post-COVID?
Great questions. And gosh, I'm usually the one that's passionate and giving all the great preaching sermons. And so I feel like I'm sitting in the front row of the congregation. So amen. I think what we need to be doing is have intentionality. So often we let people from outside of our communities determine what our solutions are. And many times they're included in diversity and inclusion or minority programs. And all of us on this call, especially this day, are really concerned about Black business issues. If we just look at the payroll protection plan, which was the largest stimulus package that this country has seen, as has been stated earlier, we were not taking into consideration. When you create a program that is really determined on payroll versus need, we know that of the 2.6 million Black-owned businesses that we own and operate in this country, 2.5 million have no employees. And so we were left out of the conversation when the program was being designed. We know that we lost 41% of our Black-owned businesses, but again, that was intentional. What we have to do now is to determine how do we not also lose the revenue that those businesses owned and operated in our communities. And so it's really our time to be thinking about where are those businesses that are still concerned about losing their own operation. When we did our survey, the number was 47% of Black businesses are stating if they don't get some additional funds in the next 60 days, they too will go out of business. And so we've got to make sure that as we discuss with this new administration, that we're targeting Black-owned businesses based on need and not based on number of employees. What we saw was there was a $439 billion stimulus package that was given out within 24 hours. And the majority of that, $250 billion of that, went to 50 publicly white traded firms where we did not have the opportunity to be able to participate. We've got to be at the table early on. We've got to be there doing the implementation as well as the execution. Anytime that there's a transition change in administration, there's always the conversation about infrastructure, new infrastructure bills and opportunities. We know that the COVID hit 40 communities where there were large percentages of Black population. That's where the infrastructure needs to be tailored and targeted. And we need to hold those types of opportunities accountable to hiring Black contractors and hold those Black contractors accountable to hold Black people and Black employees. That's how we impact our communities, by legislation, by us holding ourselves accountable and holding our contractors as well as our businesses accountable as well.
Thanks, Ron. And yes, accountability is very key in making sure that relief is coming to Black small business owners. And we definitely should talk through more specifically how we can work together in advocacy to ensure that. Mr. Thomas, coming back to you with another question. And to the other panelists, please feel free to jump in too if you would like to add on anything as well. Mr. Thomas, what are some barriers you faced in creating your business, and more specifically entering the wine industry, which is a heavily white, male-dominated industry that we know of?
Again, everyone is touching on the right issues, and that's the access to capital and actually leveling the playing field. And when you talk about the champagne space, I'm the largest African-American owner, importer of champagne in the world. Getting into that space and gaining the credibility of the French government and also the champagne industry was extremely difficult. However, it was helpful that in foreign countries, in other countries, I didn't necessarily have to, classify in these racial categories that we have to classify here in the United States in terms of Black, white, or people of color. So as Rashad mentioned earlier, the system of doing business internationally and outside of the United States, for me, particularly in the champagne space, I found to be very different and a little bit more welcoming because of the classifications. I was able to classify as American. Now in Champagne, they won't let an American own the land, which we were trying to buy the land. However, I own all the rights to the grapes that come off the land. Therefore, I'm able to give you the first press of the grapes every single time. I'm also in the veg utility space, one of the largest African-American owners in the veg utility space, doing storm work in Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, and also Mississippi. That is another space that's pretty much dominated by white males. It's an industry that we haven't been allowed to participate in. It's heavy equipment intensive. therefore the access to capital, the access to banking, the credibility and the trust that you need walking through the door. And I think Melissa touched on it when she said, our balance sheet has to show, $250,000, and it has to be $250,000 better just to get started or to have some type of acceptability in dealing with the banks. So in dealing in these white male status dominated lanes that I participated here in the US, the most important thing was to try to find my niche, level the playing field, and also have access to capital and find a friendly banker or a friendly person that would invest in you, believe in you, and give you the same ability to kind of stretch and build and grow your business as they give our white counterparts in these spaces. They are allowed to go in debt, come out of debt, and then grow their business, where we have to come into that space most of the time, showing positive cash flow and sustaining positive cash flow. So the playing field is not level in terms of the entry point, but I've been lucky enough to be able to navigate these spaces and have had a lot of success. But that doesn't mean that it's been the easiest way to do it. I face a lot of discrimination in these lanes. But you do what you need to do. You smile and you get back up. So in this champagne space, in this veg utility space, believe it or not, for every 100 no's that I get one yes. I keep knocking on the door until I get that one yes.
Wow, perseverance and resiliency it seems like are ways that you were able to expand your portfolio in business, and that's amazing for that to happen. So I'm going to ask this to all panelists, so feel free to jump in. Rashad, feel free to jump in too. What are some contributing factors that exist for many of the small business owners who needed the assistance from the PPP or EIDL program? They're not applying, or they didn't feel that they were eligible. What do you think was going on with that behind the scenes for many Black small business owners?
So I'll just start quickly, because when this happened, and I'm sure Ron did the same thing, we had a call with our entrepreneurs and said, what are you thinking? And I would say there were three things that popped up. One, certainly early on, and I'm not sure it got any better, is the lack of clarity of, is there a path to not having to pay it back? And what does this mean for me already as a Black business owner who is not looked at as lendable with a bad credit score or challenging credit score because nobody would invest in me? Is it worth taking on that risk and that debt? The second thing was not having that banking relationship. We reached out, as I'm sure Ron and others did, to all the banks we knew and said, you got to make an exception. You can't have somebody who's had a 10-year relationship with you and probably doesn't need the money, with all due respect, for somebody who's there. And so we've had some success now in this next round with M&T now being the largest and Capital One really saying you don't have to have that long-term relationship, but that was huge. And the final thing is, dare I say, our books were not in order, and not because we didn't know what we're doing, but if you're a solopreneur, you've got one or two people, you got to keep the money coming in. And it is time consuming, even with technology, to keep the books in order. And so it really spoke to a lot of these consulting firms now coming out and saying, look, we want to give some pro bono help to help get folks' books in order, because they were probably, accounting was great, but to have the audits and those were all opportunity costs when you're trying to pay people to keep their jobs, to be able to feed their families. So I think, once again, to Rashad's point, there was a lack of understanding on our needs and our ability and what that pathway needed to look like. Our path was going to look different from white entrepreneurs. It was going to look different from multi-million-dollar businesses. And it was clear, as many others said, we were not at the forefront of concern around how do you save these businesses.
Yeah, many of our businesses, as Melissa stated, we were hearing the terms financially illiterate. And I was truly offended by those comments, because it has been stated and tested that Black entrepreneurs have more postgraduate degrees, we're more educated than any other ethnic group in America. So it was not about our intellect as much as it was about our relationships. And so when we went to the banks that we banked with, and they said, the loan that you're looking for is too small because we're getting paid based upon the size of the loan. And if you remember, during the first round of funding, the average loan was $150,000. The average Black firm's annualized revenue was $75,480. So we would never have qualified for the types of loans that they made available. They then came back and said, oh, well, we'll cut that cost in half. We'll lower the size of the loans. The average size loan, once again, was $75,000. Now, in the third round of funding, they're saying, go to a CDFI. Now, over the last 10 plus years, the majority banks have marketed to us to come and open up a bank account with a Wells Fargo, a B of A, a Truist Bank, and we did. And now during the midst of a pandemic, you want us to go establish a relationship with a small community bank that may not have the resources, may not even be open during these hours of days, and don't have the resources themselves to really be able to create the technical assistance that many of our businesses need. Secondly, when we did our survey, 68% of our businesses said they did not search for technical assistance, for expert advice, not because they didn't want it, they just didn't know where to go and didn't have the relationships with organizations like the folk on the call this afternoon to really be able to give them the skills and the wherewithal to be able to get the funding. And then lastly, I think most of them really should have been geared towards the EIDL loan program. It was a much easier program, but because it was based on a loan concept and most Black-owned businesses were unsure of how long the pandemic was going to last, there was uncertainty about paying back a loan. And equally as important, when Black people heard loan, it was a concern of, I'm already paying twice the rate of my white peer for my existing loan. The last thing I want to do is put additional debt on my balance sheet. What we were interested in was investments. Black businesses needed equity in their firms. The reason why Isiah was so successful in his ventures is that he was able to create equity in his companies to be able to continue to show positivity. Many times Black businesses get a loan and immediately have to start paying that loan back at high interest rates, which makes it very difficult for them to be good banking customers. When Black people establish relationships with CDFIs early on, making sure that they understand what their needs are short-term and long-term is where we saw the largest success factor. And those businesses that had good social media presence also did well during this period of time. But many of our businesses weren't in the industries that required us to have good social media platforms. And so they were looked over.
Thank you so much.
It's so great to be on a panel with Ron, Melissa, and Isiah, because they said so much, and they said so much of what came from the polling and the statistics that we did as we sampled and asked business owners of color, Black business owners in particular. The thing I just would like to add to that is that about 37% of the folks in our survey actually got less money than they asked for. So people were sort of getting less money on top of being turned away. And if I can describe it this way for folks, right? Some of this processes was a maze for a lot of different communities, right? The going through the process was a maze, but for some communities inside of the maze, there were signs and there were arrows of which way to go. And for over and over again, for those in our communities, what we got was just more dead ends, more places that were designed to sort of not deliver, ways in which people did not have their phone calls returned quickly. All the ways in which Black people experience institutions on a day-to-day basis was only amplified when it was sort of the Hunger Games of resources that were going to run out, and institutions were incentivized to provide them to some folks over the others. And this is why I was so happy to hear from the senator, and I think it's going to be incredibly important for all of us in terms of the type of pushing we do as we have new leadership in the White House, as we have new leadership in Congress, to really hold them accountable to really leveling the playing field as it relates to power, executing in very different ways. Budgets are moral documents, and they say way more than anything about racial justice that we may put in speeches. And so in terms of how we move forward, where is the money in terms of the budget to ensure that we actually deal with a maze that has more dead ends for our communities and arrows pointing in the direction for how we make these opportunities real?
Thank you so much, Mr. Robinson. We're going to ask one question from the chat. And the chat, I'm not sure if you guys have been seeing it. It has been informational, great resources, great connections are being made. So thank you all for putting your questions in the chat. Continue doing so. If we don't get to, which we can't possibly because we don't have much time left, we're definitely going to follow up with an email to responses to some of these questions. And I know Senator Cardin's staff is in the chat now trying to talk with people too, but we will follow up with questions that are posed within the chat. So with that said, the last question to all of our amazing panelists, as we are moving towards a world post-COVID, where many businesses have closed due to the pandemic, we know for sure this will cause a buyer's market for not only establishments, but buildings, opportunities of businesses, what have you. How are we able to assist Black small business owners during that time with providing opportunities to purchase during what will be sure as a building grab by developers within Black communities as well?
I think that's a great question. This is Ron from US Black Chamber. We were early adapters to the conversation and were stating that we were going to lose between 35 and 40% of Black-owned businesses. And early on, no one either wanted to hear it, didn't believe it, or didn't take it seriously enough. And then when the Federal Reserve came out and stated, you actually lost 41% of your businesses, we said to our communities, this is the opportunity for us to look at doing joint ventures, partnerships, mergers, and where it made sense, acquisitions. There is going to be many of our businesses that failed, not because they didn't have good customers or good contracts or even a good mode of operation. They just didn't have the resources to get through these difficult times. And so the US Black Chamber is doing great work in partnering similar organizations together to be able to get through these difficult times. What we found in just the restaurant industry, which was really hit hard, many of the restaurant owners wasn't the fact that they didn't have the money to stay in operation. The landlord was not giving them the flexibility that they were giving many of the white restaurant owners. And so many of them were forced to close in a shorter period of time than their white peers. Now their white peers are coming into those same Black-owned restaurants with new flexibility from the landlord, establishing longer-term opportunities. We've got to be doing things outside of the box. If that means bringing our Black farmers into relationships with our Black restaurant owners and our Black grocery stores to save an ecosystem so that one organization or one business doesn't have to do it all by themselves. And lastly, for those of you that are Black business owners, you can onboard your own firm at byblack.us, byblack.us, so that we can support you. We can make sure that we pass on opportunities, grants, and lastly, as Black people are looking to purchase and spend with other Black-owned businesses, we can also find you there.
Thank you so much. Melissa, Rashad, Isiah, we would like to give you all like 30 seconds. I would like to just also preference that Mr. Morial from the National Urban League, president, is on with us, and he's going to provide closing remarks. So giving the floor to you three for about 30 seconds each, and then we'll go to Mr. Morial.
The quick thing I'll just jump in and say is that, we are continuing to do the work, building on the surveys and the research, but we will be mobilizing everyday folks, Black folks and allies of every race, to push Congress over the next several years and push the White House to do as much as possible to rewrite the rules. We have deep presence around these issues, but presence is not enough. We actually have to translate presence into power. And that means changing the rules that have far too often held us back. That's going to be a powerful piece of the road ahead. I hope people will join us at colorofchange.org. Visit us, sign up, and the work around the work we're doing around small businesses will be one of the many pieces that will be moving forward to sort of build us forward.
I'll follow you, and I'll echo that. At Isiah International, I would say the most important thing for all of us as business owners coming out of COVID is to truly understand the rules and understand the system that we're playing under and playing in. And a lot of your heartaches and a lot of your failures, it really is because the system has been designed to really hold you back. but keep persevering. Help is on the way. There are organizations that are working daily to kind of unlock the chains and kind of unlock the access to resources. And the most important thing is really understanding the information that's coming. And if you don't understand the information, please reach out, ask somebody, how is this new system working? How is the system changing? How is it blocking me? How is it stopping? Because some of you have great business plans and you're running into roadblocks that the system has set up, but it's important that you truly understand how the system works for you and how the system works against you.
Absolutely. Well, I will make this quick. I think the best thing is to figure out how we can actually make opportunity zones work for us. Most of these businesses that are going to get swallowed up by outside investors exist in our communities. And so we need to have a much better strategy around community preservation. Opportunity zones provide amazing tax benefits and capital gains exceptions to those who have money. And so there needs to be a way to reimagine how those work to allow us to do what we do. Capitalism is very individualistic. Black people are very community oriented. It needs to really reflect the fact that we can organize. Do we each have $1 billion? No. Do we each have $1 million? Maybe, but collectively we can create that wealth. And so I think this is an opportunity for Congress and certainly Biden-Harris to really reimagine how opportunity zones can create wealth in our communities without us losing our economic prosperity through real estate, and begin to say, how do we shift those capital gains? How do we allow collaborative and collective financing come into play? How do we not require extensive down payments? How do we finance this so it meets what our capacity is, so we can actually retain ownership and not have what is happening now is a revision story of Tulsa where you didn't burn it down, but you just took it from us right under our nose.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bradley. And I want to thank all of our amazing panelists, Mr. Thomas, Mr. Busby, Ms. Bradley, Mr. Robinson. This panel was phenomenal. And I know if you guys have been reading the chat, there are people asking you direct questions. There are people who are saying thanks for preaching and ministering to their spirit this afternoon, because it's been a very difficult time for a lot of small businesses, in particular Black small business owners. So it's nice to see a beacon of hope in all of you to some sort of resilience for the future. So thank you all so much for being a part of our panel. Next, we're going to have Mr. Morial, who is the president and CEO of the National Urban League.
I want to thank you. I want to thank all the panelists. Certainly want to thank Senator Cardin and everyone who's been part of a powerful discussion today for all of the tremendous work that they do. It's good to see friends like Ron Busby and Isiah Thomas on the phone and on the Zoom, and certainly salute the work that they do. I want to hone in on an opportunity that is in front of us to, quote, change the rules, change the paradigm, and make a mark. There will be a major infrastructure proposal coming from the White House to Capitol Hill sometime soon. That infrastructure proposal is going to be significant. It will propose the investment of funds to rebuild roads, bridges, airports, rail. It will, if it has what we think it has, it will also focus on water systems, community facilities like schools and community centers, parks, playgrounds, and housing. Our collective goal has to be inspired by the late, great Congressman from Maryland, Parren Mitchell, who in 1978 authored a provision in the Surface Transportation Act that set aside 10% of the business opportunities for minority-owned business enterprises. We must, in this bill, shape a provision that creates meaningful opportunity for Black, brown, and other businesses that have historically been disadvantaged. In this proposed bill, a provision in the bill, strong, with 21st century features to it, to ensure that as the public invests that money, it doesn't bypass Black-owned, brown-owned, women-owned, quote, disabled-owned businesses. And it is only with determination and zeal that this infrastructure bill include those that type of provision. We also need in that bill a provision that makes investments in job preparation, skills training for Black workers, brown workers, those that may have spent time incarcerated. This is an opportunity within this bill for all who've taught and committed and announced and pronounced their belief in these values to operationalize it through this bill. So I'm going to invite all of you to work together. Ron Busby is going to write it up the way it needs to be written up with help from some great lawyers. But we're gonna have to unite to ensure. We have to say that public policy created the wealth gap. Redlining was a public policy. Laws that banned our forefathers and foremothers from getting bank loans or buying property, those were public policies. And now public policy in the 21st century has to be an ally to help us close that gap. So amidst the great discussion that you all have had today, I want to focus on the here and now. This is something that we can do in 2021. And then we can align the financial services industry, the banking industry, the CDFI, the capital industry, to provide financial support for those that will be able to take advantage of these opportunities. This is a great chance for us to make a huge difference if we have a will, and we have to not be afraid to fight, to work, to convince, to motivate that this is what we need in the 21st century. This is what we need today. So thank you all for listening to me. Follow the National Urban League at Nat Urban League. Follow me at Marc Morial. Let's all be a continuing part of this conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Morial. Stefan.
Wow, I just want to say thanks to everyone so much. Thank you, Mr. Morial. I feel like I have to say amen, amen, amen. I felt like we've been to church this afternoon. So thank you all so much. We just want to wish everyone a few thank yous, especially to our speakers, our panelists, Senator Cardin from the great state of Maryland, Melissa, Ron, Isiah, Rashad, thank you all so much. We also have a lot of partners that help to make this event possible. So folks from various SBDCs, NAREB, the National Urban League, Page 30 Coalition, the Association of Women Business Centers, the Greater Baltimore Black Chamber of Commerce, and AARP. So thank you all so much for being a part of this conversation. And Renee, I'm going to turn it back over to you to close this out.
All right, Stefan, if you can advance the slide to the last slide. Mr. Busby, I know you have a huge announcement to make, so we provided a slide for you to make that announcement.
Well, I am excited. We had the opportunity to meet and work closely with the Biden team during the campaign. And last week, we went over their priorities along with the U.S. Black Chamber's priorities where we could work together. Later this afternoon, actually in 1 hour, we will have a conference call with the Vice President, Kamala Harris, along with the Secretary of Treasury, Janet Yellen, to discuss the American Rescue Plan, the priorities for this administration, as well as how we see Black businesses and Black communities need to be prioritized, and we'll have the opportunity to address some of those concerns. So the website is there, listed, whitehouse.gov/live. It will be 45 minutes of opportunity to hear from this administration on their priorities as it relates to our communities around the country. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Busby. And again, thank you to our amazing panelists, to Senator Cardin, the small business staff on the committee, to Mr. Thomas, to Mr. Busby, to Ms. Bradley, to Mr. Robinson, and to all of our amazing partners. Thank you so much for being a part of this afternoon's discussion and Mr. Morial, excuse me, part of our discussion this afternoon on Black small businesses. Just so you know, I know we saw that people had this in the chat. We are going to post this and email out this recording. So if you you missed a section, want to rehear something, don't worry. We will make sure you have a copy. And also we're working with the committee to ensure that we are going to be respectfully responding to some of the questions that were in the chat that we're not being able to answer today. Without any other ado, I know people are going to get ready for the 3 o'clock. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and have a great day.